All right, so last week, we were talking about who is the Hasid, or the how do you call it? What is the highest level of worship of God within Judaism? And we said it's very, very different than, like a monk. It's not someone who abstains and goes into seclusion, right? It's very much the opposite. In fact, it's too bad I didn't mention this, before, but we see at the end of Perashat Mishpatim, right, when Moshe is called back up to the mountain, he says, "Don't worry, Aharon and Hur are here. Mi ba'al devarim yigasha alehem." Anybody who has any arbitration or has any case, they can come forward to them. Basically saying the highest point that you can reach is that you're so involved in communal life that people rely on your judgment to settle their disputes. Meaning you understand the psychology of people, you understand how people relate to their property, and you're able to make just judgment between people. So it's like the highest level of it's the complete opposite of being secluded. It's just being as involved as possible in human life, right? That you can relate to people and you can relate to people's problems in a way that they trust your judgment. That is the Hasid, the pinnacle, right under prophecy, the highest level that you can reach. And we're going to see more as we get into the Berachot and the Tefillah, what Judaism is really trying to educate us to is as mindful an existence as possible. Meaning within our real lives, how much attention are we paying to what's going on in our lives themselves, in our human daily interactions, in everything that we do? All right, so back to the Kuzari and the rabbi. So he says, okay, so understand like a lot of these laws, they're commonly known. You're referring to moral actions that are already commonly known, right? That you can judge between people. Right, so he says the social and rational laws are indeed generally known. The divine laws, however, those are added so that people could live as a nation of the living God who actively guides them, were unknown until God Himself explained them in detail. Right, so there's what we call the rational laws, the laws that Hachamim say that if they weren't prescribed in the Torah, man would have prescribed it themselves, like don't murder, do not steal. These are rational laws. All right, but even that, he says they're generally known. We're going to see what that means soon, but there are divine laws, as such as korbanot, things that God requires from a religious perspective. We'll get into that also with the Brit Minah. These are irrational laws or non-rational laws. And until God comes and prescribes it to us, we have no way of knowing about them. Even the social and rational laws are not fully understood, although people may grasp their general principles, the proper scope and limits remain unclear. We know, for example, that comforting others and expressing gratitude are obligations, just as fasting and humility serve to discipline the soul. We know that deceit, unrestrained sexual behavior, and relations with close relatives are morally repugnant, and that honoring one's parents is a duty. Okay, we get that. This is, by the way, in the Ten Commandments, all these things. This is like universally accepted principles. Everyone agrees pretty much with the Ten Commandments, right? But determining the precise limits of these behaviors, their measure, balance, and application is not left to human judgment. That belongs to God, right? How far does Kibud Avayim go? right? Many times you'll have conflicting principles. This is a principle and this is a principle, right? They're both sacred principles, but you have an end case that kind of you need to decide which one is going to overrule and overrun the other. So these are things that God also prescribes. These are details. Human reason is inadequate in matters of divine command because it cannot fully comprehend them. In such matters, reason must submit. Right? We have our reason, we have our intellect. However, there is something beyond human reason and intellect, right? That's what we receive through revelation, and we must submit our reason to this higher reason, this higher intellect. We've repeated this concept a few times, so there's some other things that I'd like to get to. So I'm not going to spend too much time, stressing this again, right? For now, just as a sick person must obey a physician when taking prescribed medicine, even if the treatment is not fully understood, right? You trust the doctor. Consider circumcision. It has little philosophical explanation and minimal social impact. Nobody in their right mind would have woken up one day and said, "Oh, I have a great idea how to serve God. Let's perform circumcision." Right? There is no rational backing to it. It is prescribed by God as a way of making a covenant with Him. Yet Abraham, despite the difficulty of undergoing it at an advanced age, right? He was in his 90s already, accepted it for himself and his children. It became the sign of the covenant and the attachment of the divine presence to him. As it is written, "I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, throughout the generations, as an everlasting covenant to be God to you." All right? So that's a good example of a divine law. No one would have prescribed it. God came and prescribed it, gave us the precise measure. You accepted this command properly, says the Kuzari, and carried out publicly with enthusiasm and devotion, right? We make a whole celebration. We have a whole tekes, berit milah. We invite everybody to come and participate in the simcha, right? Even blessing God for it, right? We give a beracha, asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'sivanu ala milah. There's a special beracha also, not just for every mitzvah. Every mitzvah has a beracha for the mitzvah, but this has a special, right? Shevach beracha, asher kiddesh yadid mibeten v'chok b'she'er osam, right? There's this whole party and enthusiasm around this Berit Milah, even blessing God for it and acknowledging its origin. Other nations may attempt to imitate you, but they experience only the pain without the joy that comes from remembering the purpose for which the pain is endured. Right? We have misvot. We'll see, even he's going to say afterwards, even the berachot, it's kind of like tiring. Why are you sticking now 100 berachot throughout the day? It's just so much extra work. It says, no, when you do it properly, when you understand what you're doing, you're elevating the joy that you have in life, right? We perform a berit with God, right? The berit milah isn't just the pain and the blood that comes with the berit. It's being in a contract with God, being in a covenant with Him, for life, and not just for our life, beyond the scope of our life, for generations and generations, right? Later on, hopefully we'll understand this a little bit better. So even when others attempt to imitate us, they cannot truly match what we have. Consider the nations that establish a weekly day of rest in place of the Shabbat, right? So the Muslims, they do their Shabbat on Friday. The Christians, they do their Shabbat on Sunday. Everyone's trying to imitate this idea of the Shabbat. However, nobody really fully captures it the way we do. however similar it may appear outwardly. What's outwardly? Meaning, what do they do or abstain from doing on Shabbat? They don't go to work. In the best case scenario, they don't go to work, right? Do they really have proper rest? Do they really practice Shabbat properly? And we'll see soon what that means. It says, no, it is no more comparable to the Shabbat than a statue is to a living human being. It's just they copy the exterior, all the complexity of the human being on the inside, right? All the purpose of the Shabbat and the meaning of the Shabbat is completely lost from their Sundays or the Muslims' Fridays, right? It's a nice imitation. Maybe it looks nice. It doesn't really do what Shabbat is meant to do for us. And then the Kuzari has this interesting reflection concerning the Shabbat, right? I have often reflected on your people and concluded that God has a hidden purpose in preserving you. He appointed the Sabbath, the Shabbat, as the holy day and the holy days as some of the most powerful means of maintaining your vitality and distinction. Other nations, this is not a great translation of this of the sentence, is other nations shattered you. It says mithalek bachem. Mithalek means they appoint you over different divisions, right? Other nations, all right, divided you or shattered you and made you their servants. What it means here by made you their servants was appointed you as consultants, like to the kings, like you're serving the king, right? I think he's most specifically thinking about Rabbi Shemuel HaNagid, who was also in the same part of Spain as him, 1.5, 2 generations before Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. You had Rabbi Shemuel ibn Nagrila, known as Rabbi Shemuel HaNagid, who rose to be the vizier of the king of Spain and was basically became the general of the Spanish kings, the Muslim Spanish kings' military, and his most trusted advisor. Right? Because of your intelligence and moral refinement, they would have even made you their soldiers if not for the sacred times that you observe with such devotion. Again, I think this is a corrupted translation. It's not an accurate translation here. I think that Rav Kafir's translation really has the best translation to what he's trying to say, is that because especially if he's thinking of someone like Rabbi Shemuel HaNagid, who was in charge of the military, and there were Jews, who participated in military, and they were generals, and they were ministers, and we know people like Rabbi Ishaq Abarbanel, who was the treasurer of Spain. This is actually even Christian Spain later on. We have always had Hachamim in high positions within the royalty or government, right? And he says, where does this intelligence come from? He says, it comes from preserving the Shabbat. The Hachamim say, Lo nitnu Shabbatot, v'yanim tovim liYisrael, Shabbatot, and the holidays was given to Israel for the sake, ela la'asok bahem b'divrei Torah, right, in order to study Torah, to enrich our lives, to enrich our, we'll call it our intellect, our wisdom. And this made the most refined people and the most, the congregation of the wisest people, that all the kings wanted to benefit from their wisdom and took them as their servants, like the Rambam himself, who became the private physician of Salah ad-Din, the Sultan of Egypt. He says, this is all thanks to the Shabbat, because otherwise you're a nation in despair, you're a nation in galut, you're subject to so much humiliation and running around just trying to make ends meet. But because God had the wisdom to give you a Shabbat, to force you to stop everything you do one day out of the week, and rest physically and mentally and intellectually and spiritually, it allowed you, even in these worst conditions, to become or to develop the most intellectual nation that all the kings want serving them. They would even have, okay, so this time is in divine commands, remembrance of creation, remembrance of Exodus from Egypt, and remembrance of the giving of the law. Right, we already addressed this previously, the reasons behind the Shabbat. Had these sacred institutions not existed, none of you would wear clean clothing, nor would you gather to remember the law, crushed as you are by ongoing suffering and degradation, right? Otherwise, we'd be living in complete poverty. No one would even they'd have to work every day. They wouldn't even have time to prepare the laundry, right? Laundry isn't like today where you just stick it in the machine, right? Laundry then was like a day that they had to dedicate to laundry. And if you didn't have the Shabbat, making sure that we have clean clothing and nice clothing for Shabbat, he says you wouldn't even have clean clothes. Without them, you would not enjoy a single day of life. But now you are granted rest of body and soul for 1/6 of your lives. Even kings cannot achieve this, for their minds never rest, not even on their days off. The slightest matter compels them to act, denying them true rest. Had these laws not existed, all your labor would merely enrich others, becoming their spoils, right? We're taken as slaves, and we never get to enjoy one day of our lives for all the hard work that we're subject to 7 days a week, every single day. But what you invest in these sacred days becomes your true profit, right? So you make a nice seudah for Shabbat, a nice seudah for the Hagim. You rest on that day. You spend time with the family. You study Torah. Everything that you do on that day is pure profit in this world and the next, because it is spent for the glory of God. All right, so what is Shabbat really coming to do now? All right, if we're going back to what the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi here is trying to educate us to, it's to being mindful of our lives, right? Stop living your work week, right, for one day and reflect. When did, how do you call it? What was Paro's response when Moshe came and said that the people want to go free? He says, Nirpim hem nirpim. He says they're not working hard enough. Continual labor is a tactic of tyrannic regimes to keep the people from dreaming, to keep the people from aspiring to anything more than their daily labor. The Torah gives us a Shabbat as an antidote to tyranny. It's to make us reflect, take a pause in our lives and reflect on our lives and realize what's important and enjoy it on that day every single week for 1/6 of our lives, or 1/7. Okay, so the rabbi goes, this is, by the way, this is the King of Kuzar's insight from observing the Jews from the side, as the king himself, who has taken the rabbi as his advisor, right? He understands what Shabbat does to this nation and how beneficial it is for him as a king to take someone who practices the Shabbat. So an observant Jew fulfills the divine commandments, circumcision, the Shabbat, the festivals, and all that accompanies the divine law. He refrains from forbidden marriages, avoids prohibited mixtures and plants, right? Kilayim, garments, right? Shatnez, and animals, observes a sabbatical in the Jubilee years, right? Halavai, it only takes place in Eretz Israel. Halavai, we get the Yovel back, the Jubilee year, every 50th year. Everything, the whole financial system gets reset. Maybe one day we'll have a class on the Torah's financial system, and distances himself from idolatry and all of its offshoots. This, by the way, is maybe one of the anchors of the Torah, to the point where Hachamim say, Kol hakofer ba'avodah zarah, anybody who rejects avodah zarah, idolatry, paganism, whether it's rituals or its mindset. And our next class will be will deal a lot more with the mindset of pagan rituals, right? He says, Kol hakofer ba'avodah zarah, all who reject avodah zarah, it's as if he fulfilled the entire Torah, all 613 mitzvot. Why? Because the Torah comes to eradicate pagan thinking from our minds. It teaches us to do actions that go against pagan rituals, that and to undermine anything pagan rituals come to teach us, right? Such as attempting to learn the unknown without the Urim, the Tumim, and prophetic dreams, right? He does not heed fortune tellers, astrologers, magicians, diviners, and necromancers, right? These are all the professions that completely dominated the ancient world, right? Every king, they either had a wise man from the Jew, or they had a witch in a tower and a diviner, right, who would tell them fortunes of whether the battles are going to be successful and what they should do, right? He says any observant Jew, he rejects all of these professions. He doesn't listen to anything they say, right? It's like he says, anything they say, do the opposite, right? That's basically what the Torah is telling us to do. When you go into the subtleties of the mitzvot, of the korbanot, the instructions of the korbanot, and you understand the subtleties of how pagans used to do korbanot, basically it's telling you whatever the pagans are telling you to do, I'm instructing you to do the exact opposite, just like in your face, just to show you that nothing you say really works. He observes the laws of ritual purity, including those related to bodily discharges, avoids eating or touching impure animals and lepers, right? The mitzvot of Tumah and Tahara. He refrains from consuming blood and forbidden fats, which belong to the offerings designated to God, right? Ishi Hashem. You need to bring the kerev and the keraim, and you need the cherev and the dam. He brings the sacrifices required for intentional and unintentional sins, redeems the firstborn, right? And he goes, basically, he keeps all the mitzvot. And all these mitzvot, they have the purpose of either breaking free from avodah zarah and bringing God consciousness into your life as much as possible. He fulfills the commandments of the Mishkan, the Lulav, the Shofar. Oh, actually, he's probably talking about the Sukkah, right? Let's put it here. Sukkah, the Lulav, the Shofar, and takes care that all sacred vessels used in worship remain pure and fit for service. He brings offerings for personal purification, observes the laws of the fields, corners, right, the pe'ah and the orla, and produces sanctified for praise of God, right, and produce the bikurim. In short, he fulfills as many divine commandments as possible, such that he can truthfully say, I have not transgressed any of your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. This is part of this is a beautiful mitzvah that I really look forward to us doing, bringing the bikurim, right? every year we bring the bikurim, the first produce of our fields. We bring it up. There's this whole ceremony, this progression of everyone coming with their bikurim to the temple, and they bring it in the baskets. And part of what they say there is, I have not transgressed any of your commandments, right? Nor have I forgotten. V'lo shachachti. I didn't forget. I don't forget. We're saying, I don't forget you. I have you, God, in my consciousness at all times. To these are added vows, voluntary offerings, peace offerings, and acts of self-restraint. These are the religious laws, most of which are connected to the priestly service, right? So the Shabbat, the Lulav, right? Nobody would have rationalized these laws. These are all laws that God gave us to keep him in our consciousness. However, besides of this, are the social laws. The social laws, many of them, we would have instituted ourselves. To what degree? That's something that, if you leave it up to speculation, you may not get it right. You may not get the right measure, right? Including prohibitions against murder, adultery, theft, and false testimony. Obligations such as honoring parents, loving the stranger, and speaking truthfully, as well as laws governing interest, honest weight and measures, right? Ribit, as part of the other anchor of the Jewish financial system, zero ribit, and charitable provisions like leaving gleanings, forgotten sheaves, and field corners for the poor. Right? So these are the social laws, but all of this comes, right? Creation must not be compared to the work of a craftsman. When we think of God as the creator, right, we think of the watchmaker. That's the well-known mashal, the allegory of God as the watchmaker who created the watch, right? He's saying that's not our model of creation. A craftsman builds a mill and leaves it to operate on its own. I like to bring an allegory of a carpenter. A carpenter, he built a table, right, and he sold the table, right, and there's no more relation between that table and the carpenter. The creator, by contrast, not only creates limbs, but continuously sustains their powers or their vitality. This is the first halacha that the Rambam brings in the Mishneh Torah. He says, Yesod HaYesodot, the fundamental of all fundamental, the most fundamental principle, Ve'amud HaChochmot, and the pillar of wisdom, Lida, to know, Sheyesham Masui Rishon, that there is a primary cause. Then he says, Vehu Mamtzi Kol Hanimsa, and he is the creator of everything in existence. And the natural tendency would be to say, Vehu himtzi kol hanimtza, and he created all of creation. Says, Vehu mamtzi kol hanimtza, he is creating all of creation, everything in existence. Meaning he's not like a craftsman who built something, right? And he did it at some point in time in the past. How I like to explain what Mamtzi Kol Hanimtza is. If you think of something in your mind, that object that you are thinking of in your mind exists so long as you're conscious of it. As long as you're thinking of that object in your mind, it exists in your mind. Once you get distracted, it no longer exists. Our relation to God, or God's relation to his creation, is more like a person's relation to an object in his imagination. We exist because God is continually acknowledging our existence. He has us in his consciousness permanently, otherwise we would have just ceased to exist. So what is developing a God consciousness? All these mitzvot that God is giving us, He's giving us a link to keep Him in our consciousness too. It's like a two-way stream as long as we act upon it. As long as we are conscious of God, right, we have this deep connection to Him. So the Creator, by contrast, not only creates limbs, but continually sustains their power, meaning He holds them in creation. Were his guidance withdrawn even for an instant, the entire world would collapse. When the religious person remembers this with every moment, he acknowledges the Creator's ongoing involvement as though the divine presence were always with him and angels accompanied him. Why do we pray? Why do we have all this mitzvot? Right? It's to acknowledge the Creator's ongoing involvement. Having that is as though the divine presence itself were always with us. If his piety is consistent and he dwells in places fit for the divine presence, right? If you are practicing the Torah, you're doing berachot, you're praying, you're doing tefillot, you kiss the mezuzah, all these things that God put in our ways to stop and remember Him just for a moment, right? And you're living in Eretz Yisrael, the place fit for prophecy. This accompaniment becomes real, and he may even perceive it just below the level of prophecy, right? You may get this inspiration, some divine inspiration, reach some sort of understanding, right? Get what the Chachamim call the Ruach HaKodesh, the spirit of the Kodesh, right? Which is one level right below prophecy, right? What is that level that is right below prophecy called? That is what the Chachamim refer to as the Hasid, which is what opened up this section. Describe for me your Hasid. So who is the Hasid? Who is the highest level of Jewish practitioner under prophecy? Is someone who practices Judaism just like any one of us, but he is aware of what he is doing. He is aware of how he behaves in life. He brings God into every single thing that he does. Indeed, some of the greatest sages of the Second Temple period experienced visions or heard a bat kol. This is the level of the pious immediately beneath that of the prophets. What is a bat kol? A bat kol literally means like the daughter or derivative of the kol, of the voice. What is the voice? Right? If you go back to Perashat Yitro, there is one thing that everyone heard. It says, God spoke to Moshe. Moshe spoke to God. It says, Moshe daber, right? Moshe speaks. V'ha'elohim ya'anenu b'kol, right? And God responds with the kol. What is this kol? It says, Vahi kol hashofar olech v'chazek me'or. It's the sound of the shofar. That is the voice of God. And Eliyahu, when he later went back to Har Sinai, to Horeb, right, he heard a kol demama daka, a very subtle call. That is the voice of prophecy. But you can still receive inspiration without being a prophet. And what the Chachamim refer to that inspiration, they call it a bat kol, like a derivative or the daughter of the call of God. The pious person relates to God as a devoted servant relates to a master who created him, bestowed gifts upon him, watches him constantly, and rewards or disciplines him accordingly. Remember, we said previously, part of divine providence is also uh, giving us our punishment that we deserve right away, not letting it accumulate and become unbearable. Right? Disciplines him accordingly. Therefore, there is no exaggeration when he says, upon entering a private chamber, with your permission, honored ones, referring to the divine presence. Everyone familiar with this beracha? Anyone familiar with this beracha? Upon leaving, he recites the blessing, right? Who created man in his wisdom. Asher yasar et ha'adam b'chokhmah. Right? This is upon leaving the bathroom. But he says, look what he says here. There's no example. When he says upon entering, a private chamber means the bathroom. Right? There's something that the Hachamim prescribe that we say before entering the bathroom. It's kind of got lost. Almost nobody practices it, but I'm going to explain it. In my opinion, it's a beautiful thing. It says, "Hitkabedu mechubadim." It says, "Oh, honored ones," right? "Hitkabedu mechubadim misharete elyon," right? The servants of the High One. Hakuni vehamtinuni says, "Wait for me ad she'ekanes ve'etzeh." For I have to go in, and then when I come back out, right, wait for me outside. Because this is the ways of man, or the Son of Man. Meaning, it's assuming, first of all, that you're constantly in this conversation with the angels, right? That you are always talking to God. And you say, wait a minute, I have to go to the bathroom now. Now's not the time, right, to be, meditating on Yehud Hashem. This isn't the time for it. So it's like you're talking to your thoughts or to the angels or to the divine presence. You say, hold a minute, wait for me. I have to go to the bathroom. I'll be back out and we'll continue. This is the way of man. I am the Son of Man, right? And it says Misharete Enyon, the angels, the servants of the Holy One. I just want to show you a halacha that the Rambam brings, right? This is in Hilchot Mezuzah. Right? This is in Hilchot Mezuzah. Says Hayav Adam Nizair b'mezuzah. A person must be very careful with the mitzvah of mezuzah. Because everyone needs to perform this mitzvah all the time, right? You have to have a mezuzah in your house. Every time he goes in and out of the house, Yifga b'Yehud Hashem. He's going to encounter this idea of the oneness of God. That's what the mezuzah says, as the Shema in it. Shema Israel, listen Israel, or hear, O Israel, Adonai Elohenu, Adonai Echad, right? God, our Lord, God is one. Yifga b'Yehud Hashem, Shemo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? The name of God, V'yizkor ahavato, and he will remember his love of God. Meaning, what does it mean, remember the love of? You have a love of God, you have your connection to God. However, throughout the day, you're doing things, it's not on the top of your mind. Oh, so you have a mezuzah. So when you encounter the mezuzah, you have this object there that's meant to remind you of your love for God. It's like some people, they put a tattoo of their girlfriend on their arm. This way, they don't forget who their girlfriend is, or they have a reminder of the love for their girlfriend. So we don't have tattoos. We have the mezuzah, we have the tefillin, we have the sisit, we have the berachot, 100 berachot a day, the yeor mishenato, right? And he will be awakened from his slumber, from his sleep, right? Because if you don't have God, it's like you're going through life passively. You're just living your life without bringing God into your mind, into your consciousness. He says, no, the mezuzah is there to wake you up. Instead of contemplating stupid things throughout the day, you'll encounter the mezuzah and be reminded to contemplate the Yichud Hashem, right? The oneness of God. וידע שאין דבר העומד לעולם ולעולמי עולמים אלא ידיעת סור העולמים. And he'll be reminded that there is nothing that exists forever except for your knowledge of God that you acquire. ומיד הוא חוזר לדעתו והולך בדרכי משרים. Right away then, he goes back, right? He exits that pause of having God in his mind, right? And he returns to his thoughts on God, and that guides him in his decisions throughout the day. Amru Hachamim Arishonim, the early Hachamim, they said, Kol mi sheyesh lo tefillin berosho v'izro'o, anyone who has tefillin on his head and his arm, v'sisid bevichdo, and he has sisid on him, his talet, umezuzah befidho, and he has a mezuzah on the entrance to his house. Muchzak shelo yeheta, right? We have a hazakah that these are all things to remind you to not sin. Sharei yesh lo mazkirim rabim, because he has many. It's like he has many agents to remind him. He has many people reminding him, many things reminding him. And who are these mazkirim, right? Mazkira, by the way, is like a secretary. He has like many secretaries to remind him, to do what he needs to do. And these are the angels that are protecting you from sinning. It's not when we say that the mezuzah comes to protect us, it's not some sort of magical power that you put the mezuzah on your house and now you have this protection that no harm is going to come through your doorway. No, these are the malachim that are meant to bring God into your consciousness and have you connected to the divine presence as frequently as possible. And that protects you from sinning, that protects you from doing bad things, making bad decisions, and ultimately from bad consequences. Right? The angel of God comes around those who fear him, right? And protects them. So, who are these angels that are camping around us? There's the sisit, there's the tefillin. These are all angels of God, agents of God that are put there to remind us of his presence at all times. And that's what protects us. But I found that, when I put on tefillin, many times, I work from home. You're meant to have tefillin on all day. The mitzvah is all day. So many times when I'm working from home, I have the tefillin on, and I don't take it off after tefillah. I sit down in front of my computer and start to work, especially if I have to do work involving social media and things like that. It's very, very easy to get distracted. But you can't get distracted when you have your tefillin on you. So I'm sitting there with my talet and tefillin, and I'm working, and something pops up. Is it important? Do I need to deal with it? Yes. Is it just going to distract me? I get easily distracted when I have my tefillin on, right? The tefillin protects me. That's the meaning of the tefillin protecting me. So the mezuzah, the tefillin protects me, the mezuzah protects the house, or protects me when I go out and when I come back in. It's always encountering, right, these agents of God that are meant to preserve God in our consciousness or bring him back into our consciousness as frequently as possible. How profound this blessing is when properly understood. It begins with wisdom and ends with healer of all flesh and performer of wonders. This is the beracha after when you exit the bathroom, right? Ofekul basar umaflila aslo, affirming the miraculous nature of all living beings. The phrase all flesh includes every living creature. Through these practices, right, saying berachot all the time, especially upon entering and exiting the bathroom, entering and exiting the house, with the mezuzah, tefillin, tzitzit. He binds his mind to the divine presence, some through commandments written explicitly in Torah, others through tradition. He wears tefillin on his head and the seat of thought and memory, and right, the head is the seat of thought and memory, and straps descending upon his hand where he remains visible. The arm tefillin rests near the heart, the source of vital faculties, right? The sisid is the tefillin shel rosh is to tie your mind and intellect to God, and the shel yad is to tie your actions and your behavior to God. Right? He wears sisid so as not to be led astray by the heart or eyes, as Scripture says, right? Velo taturu acharei levavchem. Within the tefillin are verses proclaiming God's unity, reward and punishment, and the remembrance of the Exodus, proves that divine providence is attached to humanity and that deeds are observed and recorded. The pious person examines his senses and dedicates them to God, right? Make sure you look upon good things and make sure you don't look upon bad things. Tradition teaches that the minimum daily obligation of praise consists of 100 blessings. Beyond the fixed blessings, he adds more throughout the day over fragrance, food, sights, sounds, right? We have berachot for everything, right? You smell something good, you pass by a bush that has flowers giving off a good smell, you stop, you say a beracha, and you smell. Right? You have a nice fruit, you stop and you say a beracha and you smell it. You're going to eat the fruit, right? You say a beracha and you eat it. Joy and awe enter the soul through this discipline and are regulated by law. Joy must not turn into excess and awe must not descend into despair. How do you balance fear of God on one hand, awe, and not let it go into despair, and not joy and letzanud, becoming overjoyous, right? And becoming like a clown. Fear not. Fear must not extinguish gratitude, for gratitude arises from joy, right? As Scripture teaches, you shall rejoice in all the good, right? Excessive sorrow leads to spiritual collapse, as warned, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy. It's like, why did you go into exile? Because you didn't serve God with joy, right? You were so worried about punishment that all you did was bring korbanot because you were afraid God was going to punish you for a sin that you did, right? That eventually led to turning the mikdash into a form of trying to bribe God, and God eventually destroyed the mikdash and sent us out into exile. When troubled by apparent justice, such as prey falling to predator, reason intervenes. How can injustice be attributed to an all-wise creator? What appears harsh is part of a larger order beyond human grasp. Recognizing this, he submits to the one called the Rock, whose work is perfect. This is Hasur, right? The Rock Hasur, Tamim Pa'olo. This is in Ha'azinu, the song of Ha'azinu, Hasur, the Rock, whose work is perfect, Tamim Pa'olo. Then it goes on to say, Kichol Derachav Mishpat, all of his ways are just. Everything he does is through justice, right? So we bring God into our consciousness. Bringing God into our consciousness also brings the realization that our intellect is limited and can't understand everything that goes on around us. What are the just ways of God? If you look into the book of Eov, the book of Job, right? What Job is complaining to God, I made no sin, right? Why did I deserve all of these troubles that came upon me, right? When does Eov uh, feel satisfied? First of all, God rebukes him for, where were you when I created the world? Says, you think you understand everything that's going on? You think you understand uh, what could possibly be the justice behind what I do? And then, right, once he reached this realization and he brought God into his knowledge and consciousness. At first, he was working God out of fear, bringing korbanot every single day. Ulai hateu banai, maybe my son sinned, right? And then when he really got to learn God, it says at the end, he says, "V'nihamti alafar va'efer." It says, "L'shema oz and shema'aticha." Says, up until now, I only knew of you through, call it like through hearsay, through rumor. Why? They taught about God in kindergarten, right? So I knew that there's a God to the world. Says the Shema Oz and Shema Aticha. Says Ata, but now Einira Aticha. Right? I experienced everything I experienced, and all these discussions with my friends brought me to a much deeper understanding of you. Al ken nihamti alafar va'efer. And so too I've been consoled on dust and dirt, right? It says, Vayasim Yov kol asher lo lemishneh. He made everything, all his property, all his possessions became secondary to this God consciousness that he now acquired. And then he went on to be much, much more prosperous. Hopefully, one day we'll have a class. I have a recorded class on Eov for those who are interested. But maybe one day we'll have our own class on Eov. Thus, he lives with serenity, accepts hardship, and even welcomes suffering as purification. Right? Once you're living in this God consciousness state of mind, and you show gratitude to God for everything that you encounter, right? Then even the hardships that befall you, right? The Berit Milah, which is the pain, right? But it also comes with the covenant with God. There's two sides to the coin. Like even the hardships, once you have God in your consciousness and you express gratitude continually throughout your day and throughout your life, then even the difficult things that you encounter, right, you encounter it with acceptance. By the way, there's this also very interesting, beautiful halakha. It says same way that a person blesses on the good, right? It needs to say shehayan when atov v'amitiv, on good news that he hears. So too he needs to give a blessing for bad news that he receives, and he needs to just accept it. This is all part of bringing God into your consciousness, and it makes life much, and the hardships of life much easier and much lighter. Same way as the King of Kuzar, his observation regarding the Jews on Shabbat, that if it weren't for Shabbat, we wouldn't have had a single day in our life to enjoy, right? But now we force ourselves to have clean clothes, right? Even in our worst conditions, we have a day of rest and reflection, and that enables us also to accept hardships, and it lightens our journey for us. And we'll see that on, it kind of resembles like the difference between a person with God consciousness, going through life intentionally, being mindful of your life and what's going on around you, and someone who doesn't, just drifts through life, is like it's similar to the experience of a drunk person to a sober person, right? So who is the Hasi? What is the highest level of serving God? Is being aware and sober in everything that we do. Is doing everything that everyone else does, doing all the mitzvot, but doing it with intention and understanding as much as possible. All right. I think we'll stop here for today. And if anyone has any ideas or questions or reflections,
I have two
now's the
questions.
time. Yes, please. Bechavod.
Okay. When we covered the parasha Yitro, when the voice that we heard, that was Hashem's voice, not the bad call, right?
Right. That was the call.
Okay.
So the bad call is like derived from the call.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is, I didn't get quite the whole concept that there is something that the Hachamim stipulates that we should say before we enter the shakutim, the bathroom.
Right.
Oh, can you elaborate on that or repeat it, please?
So same way that there's a beracha, asher yasar,
Yeah,
right? When
afterward.
you exit the bathroom,
Yeah.
they also said that there's something you should say before you enter the bathroom.
Can you tell us what that is, or did you say it and I
Sure,
missed?
התכבדו מכובדים, משרתי עליון. Bracha, what do you think? Maybe we'll print it up and put it at the midrasha above
Yeah,
the
yeah,
above the Asher
that's a good
Yitzhak.
idea, Sami. That's a very good idea.
I'll put
Yes.
it there. I'll also translate it so you understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
says התכבדו מכובדים משרתי עליון. It's like oh holy ones, the servants of the Almighty. התכבדו מכובדים משרתי עליון. המתינו לי, he says, wait for me עד שאכנס ואצא. Says, wait for me as I go in, right, to the bathrooms and then come back out. שאכנס ואצא. שזהו דרכם של בני אדם, because this is the way of man, or the son of man. That,
Beautiful.
we are not angelic beings. We have
Yeah,
also bodily functions that we need to attend to as well.
that's beautiful. Thank you, Ralph.
Pleasure, pleasure. I think it's a real beautiful nosach, and it's chaval. It's chaval that mainstream, most people, they're not aware of it, and it kind of like got lost and forgotten. And I think it's chaval. It's such a beautiful opportunity to
Yeah. Yeah.
Toda.
besimha. Anyone else?
Yes, Sammy, I do have one quick question regarding the Bat Kol. So when we're looking at the Second Temple period, that's basically when we had the end of the Hebrew prophetic era, correct? And we
Yes.
had the 12
All
minor
prophetic, not just
prophets. So we
Hebrew.
stopped
All
there.
prophetic.
And was that because at that point, all that was being transmitted was Bat Kol? It was no longer Kol? Is that really how that whole era came to end?
I think, and this is my speculation, right, is that to have prophecy in its fullest, we need to have our Jewish state at its fullest. We need to have the temple, full sovereignty. You have the Kohanim. We need to have the Shemitah and the Yovel. They didn't have the Yovel at the time of the Second Temple era. Right? Only once the entire Torah is restored can we expect to have the full prophetic experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what they
Okay.
had is they didn't have the call, the full prophetic experience, but they had the bat call, like a lower level of a prophetic experience.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, pleasure. But
One,
again,
one,
this is my opinion.
Mhm.
I think it makes sense, but you could feel free to disagree with me and
I agree
develop
with
your
you.
own idea.
How everyone else feels, but I agree with you, definitely.
Okay. Okay,
Which
so
Ran,
means
it's me and you for
technically,
now.
what you're saying is then, that therefore in the Messianic age, Bezrat Hashem, which is soon, that we are going to have an influx of more prophecy because we are going to have the third temple. We are
Yes,
going to have the
inshallah.
Yuval and
Yeah,
everything.
that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah.
Rav, going
Toda
back.
rabba.
Oh, I'm sorry. Going back to the say before entering the restroom, is that in the Shulchan Aruch? Is that by the Chachamim? Where can we find
It's in the Talmud. It's
in
in
the?
the Rambam.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it's in the Shulchan Aruch, but I'm not. I don't remember. It
Oh,
could be that it's not.
all right.
It was instituted in the Talmud already now.
Yeah.
And anyways, there's no downside to saying it because there's no beracha. It doesn't end or start with Baruch Atah Hashem, right?
Okay.
Okay, so that's it. We'll see you all next week. We're gonna have an interesting class next week on spirituality or the dangers of spirituality and pagan thought.